Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's workshop. I think we'll try and get started so we don't run too late. If somebody might shut the doors, that would be good. Thank you. My name is John Lee, and I'm a pain specialist working at the HSA, the Health Services Authority. I'm also one of the organizing committee for this afternoon, and it's my pleasure to greet you all for this afternoon session, which is called Taking Up Your Health. The reason that we're holding this session is partly to do with people's interests from delegates in the past about having a session about technology in health. And we welcome two speakers from abroad who've come very kindly to speak to us. I have to say I'm very sorry Dr. Ree is not able to come from IBM. He has had a personal crisis which was totally unavoidable. So we are hoping we might get him back for another healthcare conference at some future date. Moving on, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who's going to let us know a very interesting twist on how technology is being used, in particular by children. Some of you will have heard Michael Reist already. He's a nationally recognized authority on the needs of children. He's an author of the Canadian bestseller, Raising Boys in a New Kind of World, and his most recent book of many is entitled Raising Emotionally Healthy Boys. He's spoken widely across Canada and throughout the world and has been a classroom teacher for over 30 years, but he now works in private practice where he's a mentor to young people and their parents. Please, can we all welcome Michael Reist.
Okay, am I there? Is this working? Yeah, okay. So this has been a great conference. We had a great session this morning, and we had lots of good feedback. I had lots of good feedback about that. And I wanted to try to just pick up on some of the themes that were discussed this morning. First of all, to speak in very simplistic terms about the brain, I think it's fair to say we all know about hemispheric differentiation, the left and right hemisphere. And I think it can be said generally, in gross terms, that the left hemisphere is a logical linear sphere. It's the place of language production, the logical linear sphere. And the right brain is more the spatial sphere. And what I'm seeing today is that boys, in particular, I'll talk about boys a lot, I guess, boys in particular are getting a huge workout of their spatial brain. Because of the time they're spending on video games and the time they're spending on the screen generally, their right brain, their spatial brain, is getting a huge workout. If we're honest with ourselves, we know that school is a place that values the left brain, the logical, linear, verbal brain. So we have a huge issue in our educational system today, a huge issue in our world about this disconnect between an educational system that was based on print and the ability to process text, and a whole new world that's spatial. And that is a tension that educators are feeling, that parents are feeling, and I hope I live long enough to see how this tension is going to resolve itself. Many educational institutions are moving toward a spatial model. They're moving towards a kind of screen/gaming model. A University of Pennsylvania, a very respected Ivy League college, in their Masters of Business Administration program, it's moving very much online, moving very much to the screen. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with this, but right now a lot of our kids are, dare I say, suffering because they're expected to behave one way during the day with text and print, reading and writing, but in a large part of their lives they're on the screen. And I want to introduce the word neuroplasticity. I think we're all familiar with this word neuroplasticity. Use it or lose it. The parts of your brain that you use will develop, the parts of your brain that you don't use will atrophy. And again, this had huge implications for children, but all through the lifespan, the parts of our brain that we use develop and strengthen. The parts of our brain that we don't use atrophy. And what I'm seeing in the classroom anecdotally is a lot of kids for whom the processing of text is becoming harder and harder because it's not something they practice on a daily basis. One statistic, again, coming from Canada, I come from the province of Ontario, 21% of Ontario students report that they read together with their parents every day. 21%, that's less than a quarter of students in elementary school report that they read with their parents. Now this has huge implications. What is the language environment from which kids are coming? Even the spoken word. The spoken word is largely a logical, linear, verbal kind of exercise. And I feel increasingly that kids are coming from what I would call an impoverished language environment into a very demanding language environment called school. So I think, I just want to put that out there as something that we need to be conscious of, and I think we need to talk to kids about. Because one of the things I say to kids is this: the decision to be literate today is a bigger decision than it's ever been before in history. If you want the stickers that school is giving out, if you want the benefits that school has to offer, you're going to have to make a conscious choice to become proficient at the kind of cognitive processing that school demands. And it's logical, linear, verbal. Mathematical is another thing, although I will say a thing about mathematical. It's been shown the mathematical brain is more the spatial brain, and that is one advantage we find in the statistics that boys generally, again, gross generalization and subject to controversy, but the statistics show that boys' math scores are higher than their language arts scores. And a lot of scientists would say, well, that would stand to reason because of this spatial bias in the brain. But for kids today, this decision to be literate is a bigger decision that's ever been before, because in no way does the culture support literacy. They are growing up in a visual culture that does not support literacy in any way. The new attention span is 3 minutes. And you're feeling that today. You know, it's been a long day. You've been here since 9 o'clock, and you've been listening to a lot of language. You've been focusing for a long period of time. And this is a good opportunity for you to feel a bit of empathy, because this is what your kid feels like at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you know? The new attention span is 3 minutes. Research has shown on YouTube that any video lasting longer than 3 minutes on YouTube is less likely to be watched. And that's a kind of threshold that people are advising in social media not to go beyond the 3-minute threshold, because most people cannot sustain their attention for more than 3 minutes. That's very interesting. So then the question is, okay, so Mike, how do I expand my attention span? Whether I'm a child or whether I'm an adult, because all of our attention spans are shortening, use it or lose it. The way you expand your attention span is by using that attention span. And there's no alternative. We have not devised a pill yet. We've devised a pill that can stimulate the frontal lobe, the attention control center. And that's ADD, and that's ADD medication. And it's a stimulant. Now, why would you give a stimulant to a kid with attention deficit hyperactive disorder? It stimulates the frontal lobe, it stimulates the attention control center, so that that child is able to put the brakes on his natural distractibility and come back to the task. Now, medication does do that. How do we increase attention span naturally? By using attention span. And again, something to share with kids. All of the, so many of the things I talk about, I believe that we should share with kids, because I think knowledge is power. And I think a lot of kids, if we don't tell them why they're having trouble in a particular situation, they will default to the word stupid. If you visit my website, michaelrice.ca, you'll see my last blog post is there on the front page. And my last blog post, the title is, I never knew I was stupid until I went to school. I never knew I was stupid until I went to school, because school ranks you, values you, rewards you for your ability to sit still, pay attention, and do what you're told. And for a lot of boys going into school, sorry, that's hard for me. And they don't say, oh, it's because of my gender difference, it's because of my biological, neurological difference. They say it's because I'm stupid. I never knew I was stupid until I went to school. So we have a huge task in education, in parenting, in society, to deal with this disconnect, this clash between a visual world, a YouTube world, and that old print-based world, which is where the stickers are being given out. And anybody who's going to rise up in this world, education is it, and education is still largely print-based. I want to talk about the pedagogy of the screen. Screens teach. Screens have a lesson. And I want to name 4 lessons that screens teach you. And again, this is the kind of thing we need to teach kids. Screens teach you, don't do anything that's boring. As soon as something's boring, you get away from that. See the implications for school? Screens teach you this. They teach you that constant novelty is normal. Always changing, always changing, always changing, always changing. You see the problems with that for school? It's not constantly changing. You have to focus for 20 minutes, half an hour. And I think if kids were taught this, they'd say, you know what, okay, now I see it. And I need to make a conscious choice to pay attention. Third teaching of the screen, whatever's new is best. You don't want iPhone 5. That's embarrassing. You don't want iPhone 6. You want iPhone 7. You don't want number 1, 2, 3. You want number 4. Whatever's newest is best, and the whole industry, funded by billions of dollars way beyond any educational system or medical system, is based on the inbuilt idea of, what do you call it, obsolescence. Things get old fast, you want what's new. And it can be a very demoralizing thing, because you're never current. In the technological world, you're never current. There's always something better coming. And corporations have done an excellent job of capitalizing on this. The fourth teaching of the screen is that instant gratification is normal. You should always be instantly gratified, and anything you do should have an immediate reward. And I use the little example. You're sitting, you kids say, oh, I don't understand what you're talking about. You're sitting at the dinner table, or you're talking to a child. You have a $5 bill and a $20 bill. And you say, you can have the $5 bill right now, or if you wait a month, I'll give you the $20 bill. That's called delayed gratification. You can have $5 right now, I'll hand it right to you. But if you wait a month, I'll give you $20. Most kids will take the $5 right away. And that's video games, that's screens. Screens are based on the idea of immediate gratification. You take the reward right away. You do not wait for the reward. So you're going to enroll in a program at school, and this program is 4 years. It's a long time to wait. And there's a lot of kids for whom that doesn't compute. But on the screen, I don't have to wait. So again, what's the point of this? To make us all depressed and throw up our arms? No, the point is awareness. What we don't understand controls us. And so the more we understand technology, the less we're controlled by it. Gender differences in screen time. As I said this morning, for boys, statistically it's video games. For girls, statistically it's social media. Boys love the spatial, girls love the connection. Come back to that in a few minutes. We talked about this morning about oxytocin, the need for connection, the illusion of connection and the feeling of isolation that results. We talked about the rates of depression among young girls. It has been shown, studies have shown, that the more you use social media, the more depressed you become. The more isolated, or a feelings of isolation increase. Human satisfaction with relationships diminishes the more you use screens. Why? Because they are the illusion of intimacy. They are not true connection. The other thing I want to talk about with boys and girls and screen time is the way that boys and girls are now entering separate spheres. Where boys are spending so much time on video games and the screen, they're not spending time with girls. And girls and boys are not just hanging out together, they're not just hanging around together. And the social skills needed, particularly for boys with girls, are not getting practiced. And you have a lot of boys who just live in boy world, and boy world is video game world. And video game world can be very misogynistic. I don't know if many of you watch your kids on Call of Duty or watch your kids on the screen, but there's a huge area of study of male attitudes towards women in video games, and it's been shown that video games, the culture of video games is hyper-masculine, and some would say misogynistic, and that the language used by video game players can be very misogynistic. Many girls coming onto video games will choose a male avatar, the character you create on the video game, And the girls choose a male avatar to avoid abuse. Many female gamers, hardcore female gamers, report huge abuse online. What is it about that culture of video games that is so male-dominated and so misogynistic? This is something that needs to be talked about with our boys and our girls. I think it's a backlash to the feminine environment of school. We'll come back to that in a minute. But boys feel school is a very feminine environment. They go on to video games and they feel that this is, okay, now we're men. You know, now we're going to shoot up and we're going to be strong men and so on. So it's a kind of antidote to the feminine environment of school. I talked this morning about limits. I talked about the 2 hours for every 5 hours rule. A couple of practical strategies I just want to share, because parents, you want something you can take away with you, and I have a couple of practical strategies that I advise for parents. If you're not a parent yourself, but you're someone in a caregiving situation who advises parents, then a couple of tips that I recommend. Number one, no screens at bedtime. Screens are stimulating. Kids who take the screen to bed have a harder time falling asleep. This is proven in research, and common sense would tell you. The solution, no screens at bedtime. Parental control apps. I'm not going to name parental control apps because there's so many out there and I don't want to be favoring one over another, and I'm not well enough versed in the pros and cons, but there are so many free apps now that you can get on your phone that will disable your child's screen whenever you decide. I used to advise parents to unplug the Wi-Fi from the home. That's perfectly reasonable. Unplug the Wi-Fi or change the password on the Wi-Fi. But I have a couple of parents who are using these phone apps now, and you hook the phone app up, and it will shut off your kid's iPad. And you say to the child, you have 1 more hour, you know, 1 hour is the limit, we're coming to the end, and it's 5 past the hour, 10 minutes past the hour, 15 minutes. Oh, just a minute. I've given you 3 warnings, that's how we do it. 3 warnings, you know. Okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to turn it off for you. And you're going to get pushed back, but you're the adult in the situation. And as I said this morning, they're the canaries in the mine, so we're going to err on the side of caution. Parental control apps. Number 3, data plans are not necessary for children. Data plans are not necessary for children. Your child has a cell phone so that they can contact you in emergency. They do not need a data plan where they can be playing in the back of the car, where they can be playing 24/7. Family meeting, family policy, personal policies around technology. Dinner time, family meeting, let's discuss what are our rules about technology are going to be. It's called living intentionally. And you have to have an intentional decision that these are going to be our limits. Discuss the issues that you've learned here today, bring them tomorrow and discuss them at the dinner table. Again, going back to that idea that knowledge is power. There are times when you have to play the adult and you have to restrict and monitor. And that's important for all adults in the situation to realize, because we're tired, we feel guilty, we don't want our evening to be full of negative stuff with our kids, so we relent. A strong parent is a consistent parent. And we need to decide on those limits when everybody's happy, and then when the temperature rises and the kid is angry, those limits are on the fridge door. We all decided what the rules will be. I'm just enforcing what we decided would be the family rule. Again, if you go on my website, one of my about 3 or 4 blog posts ago, the post was called How to Regulate Your Child's Screen Time Usage. And in there's a downloadable schedule that you can print off and modify for your own needs and print off and put on the fridge door. Watch together, play together. What is Grand Theft Auto? You mentioned that this morning, Mike. Grand Theft Auto, I don't know what that is. Well, if you don't know what it is, then go and find out what it is. Go on YouTube, type in Grand Theft Auto gameplay, and just see what it is. Your kid's been nagging you for Grand Theft Auto 7. I don't know what it's up to now. And so you go on YouTube and you see what it is. We're so lucky as parents today because anything we're not sure of, we can go on YouTube and say, what is this? What is Snapchat? What is Instagram? What are the pros and cons of it? Go online, find out, educate yourself. Talk about what you've seen with your kids. But ultimately, the goal is moderation and balance. Screens are not going away. Screens are here to stay, and your child will probably work on a screen for the rest of their life. Screens are going to become more sophisticated. We saw the little video before we started with the hologram. That's coming fast, and it's coming fast in gaming. And full immersion video games were released a couple of months ago. It's going to take a while for them to trickle down. the Oculus system. The Oculus system has been launched in California. I'm guessing that with the Christmas rush, it'll be a huge thing. But it's the next big thing. And kids are going to wear kind of goggles over their eyes. And I've had the Oculus goggles on, and it's unbelievable. You are literally in the room. You can turn your head 360 degrees. You can turn your head and look at somebody coming up behind you with a gun. I had to sit down to play it because it was so disorienting, but it's coming, and that's going to be the reality that a lot of our kids are going to live in, virtual reality. And it's fascinating, but we're only afraid of it if we don't understand it. We're only afraid of it if we're uneducated. And as people, as parents, and as people who work with children and work with parents, we have to make ourselves aware. Google it, the Oculus system. What is it? What are the implications? It's the first generation to be dealing with such incredible technology. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation, and we can have more of a discussion later on. I have some other things I wanted to talk about, but I don't want to hog the whole time. So I'll pass it on to someone else. Okay.
Thanks very much for Michael for that. I think my take-home message is how powerful these things have become and how much involved in our lives there are, and how, thanks to people like him, we can perhaps put some boundaries there to help guide the people that we love most. Our next speaker is Stephanie Deer, who is Director of Population Health Consulting at Cerner. She has executive responsibilities for managing the western region of the US and helping clients develop and execute population health management vision and strategy. She's taken the lead with Cerner Population Health's most strategic clients and has helped lead the population health consulting organization and create methodology, processes, and associate development in industry knowledge. She has worked with Cerner and has since August 1998 and has had a long and impressive career. She's also had a really difficult journey to get here from the West Coast, so may we all please thank Stephanie for coming here and welcome her to Cayman and to the Healthcare Conference.
Thank you, John. I am Stephanie Deer. I'm going to fly by these first couple. There's my bio, all that good stuff, followed by Cerner. Currently, I do work for Cerner Corporation. We're a $4.4 billion worldwide company, Fortune 500, some 24,000 associates. I've turned the wrong way. Over 18,000 client facilities worldwide. Pretty big operation. Currently, what we are, what I am focused on within population health is really this journey, this shift. There's a healthcare crisis happening all around the world that really, it's gotten very expensive. There's an awful lot of disparity. And so this crisis isn't something that's new. It's been decades in the making. And really what we're talking about is we're getting from a journey from sick care to well care. And as that is going on, what we're really kind of talking about is getting outside the four walls of a hospital and really taking that journey from being sick, from people managing their sicknesses from when they get sick to really trying to stay well. And that's where the shift is happening, and that's what's going on when we're talking about population health. Is it a macro level or is it a micro level? Are we talking about populations? It sounds like we're talking about lots of people. We are, but when you really think about it and you think about population health and the impacts that you make, what we're really getting into is when you're doing healthcare, it's very individual. It happens at every single person, at every single person's level. So it is very much getting into the primary care and taking that out into the community past just the traditional healthcare facilities. So when you look at what keeps us healthy versus where we spend our money, so here over on your left side is access to care is certainly a part of it, is can you get the care when you need it? versus the genetics. There are just certain things that it just was kind of luck of the draw based on your DNA, based on your sometimes it's male, female, but genetics does play a part of it. The environment does play a significant role in it too, is how do you live? Do you have access to clean water? What's going on in the environment that you live in, as well as your health behaviors. Do you work out? What do you put into your mouth? And of course, that's a big part of it. When you come to the other side of this slide, this is where we get into how we spend. The fitness industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that's available, but when you start thinking about the healthy behaviors versus the other things, think about what most people do as far as their medical care goes. Most of the money is still being spent after you're already sick. And so that's one of the big drivers of where we are today with the healthcare crisis. When we start talking about population health, this is very much an eye chart, so you're not necessarily meant to see it all. But when you think about population health, the center graphic here is kind of the landscape of the healthcare scenario, with the person in the center and being able to have your healthcare facilities, the social, the church, the families, all of the support centers across the whole scope of the health spectrum. The things that I'm going to surround this slide with are all of the different areas that when you're talking about population health that we get into. And so what these are the infrastructure, it's the clinical integration, it's the payers, it is engagement of the members, it is the care teams. How do you figure out who needs to be cared for and what care they need to be given? The business models are changing dramatically. So when you talk about population health management, these are all the different things. And the point is, yeah, this is a little bit of an overwhelming slide. There is an awful lot going on that has to be considered when you're thinking about population health management. We've summarized it in kind of a more simplistic approach. It's know, engage, manage. The know is who is your population, who needs to be cared for, and what do you need to do for those people. The engage has to do with engaging both the person or the patient as well as the provider. It's a whole package, and it's making sure that both that provider relationship with that patient or the person, that is a very significant component of it. That's the one I'm actually going to spend the most time here in the next few minutes. And then the final one is the manage. The manage gets down to is what do we need to do for these folks? How do we improve the care of people? What is all of this data? If you've got all the data for these people, and we are moving into a very electronic world, and I think he's right. I don't think it's going away. But how do you use this data to tell us what we actually ought to be doing? This slide is kind of talking about, when we talk about population health management, most of the healthcare system, most of my clients, and frankly most of the industry, most healthcare organizations are very much spending their money and focusing on payer systems and the services. So how do we have compliance? You've heard of meaningful use maybe in the US. There are a lot of programs, whether it's a grant or at-risk contracts. That's where most of the money is being spent. And that's where most of the attention is today. Now, one of the shifts is what you see over on the other side is, yes, health systems do recognize that, that patient engagement is important. But when you see this, if you start over on the very far right of the screen, probably 1 to 2% of, well, actually most, probably, I think it's 60 to 70% of healthcare systems do have a payer portal in the U.S., or a consumer portal, a patient portal in the U.S. But when you look at the statistics, only about 2% of the patients are using it. And so that has got to be one of the things that's got to shift. How do you, if person engagement is so critical, if that's one of our 3 major parts of things that have to happen to move where we are, then why do we only have 2%? People aren't using this stuff. So how do we engage a person if nobody's going to use it? Build it and they will come? Probably is not a good approach. And so that's what we're seeing over on the right is the shift of things that will happen. We are seeing a shift in outreach, client relationship management, and that's actually consumer relationship in this context. But how do we know who needs what services, and how do we keep track of people? Who's really in our population and who needs our help? How do you get them to engage? And so that's where, when you think about the differences about what the healthcare system wants and needs versus what the consumer wants and needs, it becomes kind of interesting. For the health system, we need to increase the acquisition, engagement, and in-network retention. How do we keep people coming into our system, and to be able to optimize our efficiencies and being able to keep things more affordable. Whereas your consumers, they want what these boys want in their games. They want it to be easy. They want to have access to it when they need it. They need it to be reliable. They need it to be simple. They need it to be incorporated in life. And so that is one of the big changes that we're starting to see as different clients and companies are starting to really focus on this. So our vision, Cerner's vision in the consumer space is right behind me, is enabling organizations to provide a branded consumer experience that empowers individuals to manage their health through technology that anticipate their needs, connecting them with knowledge, their care team, and their community. The quote below it is from one of the CIOs from one of our biggest clients at Cerner, Memorial Herman, which is in Houston, Texas. And the phone over on the right side is a graphic of his. That is his phone. I mean, we all have our phones, our smartphones, and on your front page, on your very first page, you've got your apps. His challenge back to us was, make me get rid of one of my others. This is what I want on my front page. You guys have to make, he was talking to us, you guys have to make an application that is so useful to me that I'm willing to give you real estate on my front page. That's the kind of stuff that we're working on today as far as getting into patient engagement. Now, I think we can bump the calculator. Surely we can beat out the calculator. That's what we're going for. But the point is if we don't create technology and put it in people's hands of something that's truly useful, then why? He's not even going to give up his calculator to give us the real estate if it's not something usable. And so, when you think about the consumer and you think about what it looks like for a person, is you think about all the different roles that we play. We work, we are a mom or a dad, we are a daughter or a son. We have all of these different roles that we play in our life. And so one of the tricks that we have to be able to do is create an application that feels consistent. It has to work across the board. It has to work I could go onto the computer, I could go to my phone. If you can have access to those same kinds of things and allow it to work in different platforms, that's one of the factors of success that we have to be able to do. When you look at what we've done to date, and this is kind of the industry in general, the areas in blue really get around the more the transactional as opposed to the engagement. Okay, and so that's one of the shifts that has to happen, and it is starting to happen. This is kind of talks through just a couple screenshots of what we've got available today, what it is looking like. And there are different views if you see it on your phone versus a screen. Obviously, real estate becomes a very different size from different devices. But over on the right, what you've got is these are the various areas. Managed care gets into things like being able to schedule an appointment, refill prescriptions, messaging the care teams, getting reminders, what's due for me? Hey, have you had your mammogram yet? You know, and your health record to be able to send me, these are the things I need to be getting taken care of, me personally, or me as the mom, this is what my kids need. Or even me as they kind of refer to the chief medical officer of the home. A lot of times that, it could be a man, a lot of times it does fall to the woman, is I do have to chase my husband. What, you know, has he had his annual physical? Those sorts of things. Managing wellness is being able to connect with fitness data. I want my Fitbit. How many of you guys are running around with a Fitbit, or mine's a Jawbone, whatever, iWatches? I mean, there's all kinds of different technology that you could be wearing on your wrist. I want that to feed into my health record, being able to have that. Being able to complete the health risks assessments. I do not want to have to show up to the doctor's office 20 to 30 minutes early so that I can complete the forms. I want that taken care of. Let me do that at night, you know, when I'm sitting in front of the TV. I don't want to have to go to the doctor's office early. I don't have time because that's got to be during the day. So those are some of the things that are coming. Manage health expenses. Could I pay my bills online? I can do that for every other industry. Why aren't we able to do that every time, just like we do in paying the light bill? The light bills are ahead of us. Managing benefits. There are incentive programs. As an employee of a corporation, I'm actually incented that, there's different kinds, but being able to, whether I ran in a 5K, or I attended an education session, or I got 10,000 steps in a day, there are different incentive and programs that a lot of employers are putting in place. So being able to manage my own benefits is another part of the resources. Shopping and seeking help. My mom called me, this has been about a year by now, but she called me and said, okay, so I've got cataracts. She lives in a rural part of Missouri, which is where I'm from. And she said, I want to come to Kansas City and have the procedure done there. That way, if you can take me back and forth to the doctors, it's only going to be a couple days, but I'd feel better if I was nearby. She's like, find me a surgeon. Okay, great. So that's part of it, is how do you find those providers? How do you connect all of this stuff? Additionally, I mean, things that are coming. Again, a little bit of an eye chart. I'm not going to sit here and read all of that to you. But there's more coming all the time. Is video conferencing, being able to, and it's same 5 areas, but being able to continuing to grow that technology. It's got to be, again, if I'm going to get real estate on Bradshaw's front page, this is some of the things that we've got to have in people's palms of their hand. Things that we're also doing today, the Fitbit devices, the Jawbones, the iWatches, I mean, whatever, you know, pick a brand, but being able to incorporate that. Scales, blood pressure cuffs, being able to have that biometric information feeding up through. You think about maybe a congestive heart failure patient. If they're starting to be weight gain and it's not explained by Thanksgiving or something else, some big eating event, what is that weight gain? Is it water retention? And if you're seeing that, and if that's already feeding in, and there are monitoring systems that are happening on the doctor's side, what would it take to get a phone call and to have a conversation with a person? Perhaps it's a medication that's gone out of whack. And being able to get that person into a doctor's office before it happens on Saturday at 11 o'clock at night. What happens then? Instead of coming to the doctor's office, it's a phone call to an ambulance, and it's heading to an emergency room. Because a lot of times it's an elderly person. I didn't want to bother anybody. No, I didn't feel that great. but I didn't want to bother anybody. I'm fine. Maybe you weren't fine. And things that could have been prevented turn into emergent situations. And so being able to incorporate that holistically, those are some of the things that we're after clinically, is managing those chronic conditions and being able to monitor them and truly improving them. The device connectivity, again through the internet, like they were talking about with AT&T, is really becoming critical. The security around it, absolutely high priority. But being able to control the diabetes, the congestive heart failure, asthma. Think about an asthmatic that if they can't get in and they're having problems, then they're going to end up in the emergency department. So healthcare, it's too important to stay the same.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So I'd now like to open it up to questions. Anybody got any questions? I think this is a relatively small room. We're going to try and see if you can project your voice across the room. Thank you, ma'am.
Do you believe that boys are playing more video games than in the past? I mean, they had Nintendo, Sega before, right?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure about an increase in the number of boys. I would imagine that there is an increase, but there is certainly an increase in the sophistication of the kinds of screens that they're using. And I've heard, I think the statistics I see are somewhere around 80% of boys are regular video game users.
Okay, and would you say that's a bad thing, bearing in mind that in 20 years, the world will be more visual than now?
That's an excellent question, and I'm totally open to change. If there's one thing that history teaches us is that things never stay the same. I think that it's inevitable. I think that the trend is going to continue, and I think that we are all going to spend more and more time interacting with screens. But in the early days of the automobile, when we didn't wear seat belts, it's going to be a question of managing this change. And that's a huge issue in our culture right now, is change management. That's the big, hot ticket topic, change management. And I think that it's definitely called for in screen time. And a fascinating presentation here about the medical system. I think it's happening there too. Change management. Change is inevitable. The question is, how do you manage that change? So this was very interesting to me to see this, the technological applications to the medical system.
Ma'am, here, thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentations. This is a question for you, sir. I was wondering, you were talking about how the gender differences within the classroom. Do you have any strategies for teachers who have to not only meet the needs of their students on an individual basis, but also manage the entire classroom? Because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, no, it's a very important question, and it's a very difficult question to answer. At the break, I don't know if he's here, but I had a husband come and take me over to his wife, and his wife hadn't seen my presentation. She says, I got to bring you over to talk to my wife, because he says, my son's squirminess is just natural, and she says, well, he needs to perform in school. So I went over and I talked to her. Is she here? No, I think she's out at one of the booths. And she said, you can say what you want about gender different boys need to squirm, but in the educational system, there is still a really strong bias towards sit still, be quiet, and fill out those worksheets. And it really comes down, in my experience, it comes down to one thing, it's the teacher. Teachers have to be more aware of these differences. It goes back to expectations. Their expectations are unrealistic, and I think that the system has to change. And she was saying, in her opinion, I don't know the Caribbean educational system, but she was saying in the Caribbean very often school tends to be more traditional, and there tends to be less tolerance for kind of accommodations and modifications. In Canada, certain areas of Canada are more progressive. They're more open to accommodations and modifications for children. It varies according to jurisdiction, and it also varies according to teacher and level of teacher training. So it's luck of the draw whether or not you have a teacher who's boy-friendly. It's luck of the draw whether you have a teacher who's kid-friendly. But I think we need to do more professional development. I think teachers need to understand these differences. I mentioned a couple of things this morning. I talked about stand-up desks. Why is this so revolutionary that there along one side of the wall there'd be a bench where kids could choose to go and stand up to do their work? Why is it a problem for a child to stand at their desk to do their work? Again, go back to my last blog post where I talk about the stationary bikes in the classroom. These might seem flaky, but I think we're going to need to go there. The idea of school being inflexible, that's got to break down. Kids are coming from an environment where they have choice and control, i.e. cyberspace. In cyberspace, you have total choice and control. You don't like something, you leave it. You come into school, and you can't leave it. And they're acting out, and they're pushing back. And educators have two choices. They can drug that pushback, they can punish and shame that pushback, or they can accommodate that pushback. I think it's a positive thing. Going back to the previous question, do you think these changes are good or bad? In many ways, I think they're good. Kids are empowered by the screen. They're kind of in charge of the world they're living in there. And then when they come to our environments, they want the same voice. They want to be listened to, they want to be taken seriously, and they want to have power and control over the environment. And this, again, is going to be the issue for kids in the classroom. So for a teacher, I was there. And it's easy to talk theory. It's a different thing when you're standing in front of 30 kids and you've got 5 boys who are diagnosed, as I had my last class, in my last year of teaching. I taught for 30 years. I retired 30 years ago. The last semester I taught, I had a class, period 1, 30 grade 9s, 10 were diagnosed ADHD. Now, how do you manage that? You manage it by riding the wave. You don't fight the wave, you ride the wave. It's a question of managing differences, and it's an art. Teaching is not a science, it's an art, and you have these kids with their special needs, and you need to anticipate and manage what are going to be the problems. Now, a lot of my time, I would say more than half of my speaking engagements are to teachers, to educators, talking about practical strategies in the classroom that teachers can use to get through a day with boys. And I think that there just has to be more of that happening. And the idea of accommodation and modification of curriculum, there has to be more talk about this. So I don't have a silver bullet answer. I'm very sympathetic to teachers who are in that situation. There are strategies that one can use. But I think the biggest one that it comes down to for me is professional development and unrealistic expectations. The more we know about child development, the more realistic our expectations will be. Something as simple as this morning's presentation. I think there were 3 or 4 points in that presentation that could change a teacher's approach to boys in the classroom. One man came up to me afterwards, he says, you know who you need to talk to? He says, you need to talk to coaches. He said, I deal with so many coaches, they're men, and they still have unrealistic expectations about the boys in front of them. And I'm not saying let them run wild. I'm not saying let them just, do whatever they want. I'm saying anticipate and manage. Anticipate what they're going to find difficult and learn to manage it. But first step is understanding these differences. Yes,
Thank you.
There's a question over there.
I have a question for Stephanie, if I
Yes.
may. It's a slightly curved question. How do you see the vision of healthcare provision, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years from now? Do you think the general practitioner will still be sitting in an office with a nurse somewhere else and a receptionist? Is that still going to be the model, or have you got has Cerner got a different view?
Well, I do think that as healthcare is changing, I do think that you're going to see a very different team. I've got a client up in Alaska, actually, and they use what they call a NUCA care model. And the NUCA care model is very different. No, doctors are not in their own offices. The doctor actually sits in a pod area with their nurse, their scheduler, their pharmacist, their nutritionalist, their behavioral coach, and they are very much team-oriented. So that's a NUCA care model. There's also patient-centered medical homes. I think that's part of the big shift that we are going to see across the industry. It's not about putting more work on any one role, but it's about enabling every role to work at their top of their licenses and have the right folks engaged when they need. I think there's got to be there's already becoming a shift. If somebody comes in with a sore throat and they're a diabetic, why wouldn't you also take a look and do that foot exam right then? True story is that is one of the scenarios we have. A diabetic patient came in with a sore throat. They did a foot exam. He had an ulcer on his foot. Well, it wasn't bothering him that much. But part of the change that we're starting to see happen is because, foot exam is one of the things that they are checking to see every single time. Now, did it save that man his leg? Did it prevent an amputation? Yeah, it's really hard to prove what didn't happen, but because they found it, amputations happen because ulcers get out of control. And I do think that those kinds of shifts are some of the things that we're going to see is processes have to change. It's not just about software and technology, but it's very much about integrating that technology into people's lives.
Felicia.
My question is for the gentleman, Michael. So just a question. If you see it in society nowadays, and they have this train of thoughts where we should not reward necessarily everyone's effort. Like, you've gone to a society now where before it was only first, second, and third was recognized, then you'll have a sports day now and you get all these other ribbons for participation, or you get trophies because your kids are in Little League. And I personally don't mind the extra reward, because to me, I have that son that's born in October, not December, and he needs that extra encouragement, and I do have to think ahead of the game in regards to how to deal with him, even just to get through homework, because it's like, okay, you're getting tired, go run around the room 2 times. Like, you have to think through the scenarios. But what is your take on rewarding the kids that fall into that category, whether or not they're necessarily first, second, or third?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a book by Alfie Cohen, it's called Punished by Rewards, and he says if you get too much into rewards, then you're totally into external locus of control, and the only reason I'm going to do anything is because of the reward that's going to come. And so you actually disincentivize a lot of kids to perform because they feel that they don't have any chance at achieving that reward. I want to mention a book by Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck's book called Mindsets. And this book is really taking change agents and so on, the world by storm, this topic of mindsets. And in there, she makes a very convincing argument for rewarding effort rather than results. And it's been shown that kids, when you reward kids for results, they become more cautious, they become more risk averse, because they're afraid of the next time they're not going to get that reward. When you reward kids for efforts, you create a mindset that says that you are a good, successful person because of the effort you put into something. It's in some ways a nebulous distinction, but I think it's a very important distinction. I worked a lot with gifted kids over my career, and they did some research that showed when they had kids, they gave the kids a test, and then they gave them their marks, and they asked the kids, do you want to take another test that's a little bit harder? The kids who scored highest on the first test declined to move on to the harder test. They chose to stay with their high mark. And she theorizes, and it's a very convincing argument, that when we reward results, we create a kind of fear of failure. And when we reward effort, we teach that change is possible, future acquisition of skills is possible. So if you're interested in this area, I think it's a book that I keep in my office, and I recommend to parents. I give away free copies. Mindsets by Carol Dweck, D-W-E-K, and The New Psychology of Success. And this book is getting a lot of attention. The other book I mentioned is Alfie Cohen's book, Punished by Rewards. The downside of stickers, stars, and ribbons. And you get kids who are raised in an external control, and they will eventually say to the parent or the teacher, what are you going to give me? You know, why should I do this? What are you going to give me? And so rewards can have a downside. So there are a couple of thoughts, okay?
Michael, I have a question for you. And it's really about how do we keep up? I mean, stuff changes so fast. I'm fairly good with techie stuff, but I worry about being left behind.
Yeah.
Or is it just that I'm getting too old and my brain has lost its plasticine?
You're probably getting too old in your brain. Just kidding, no. You know, I'm lucky because I have 4 kids, and boy, those 4 kids, they keep me going, you know, like they keep me on my toes. You know, oh, Dad, they roll their eyes at one time, and I'm not going to let them roll their eyes. You know, I'm gonna keep on top of it. But you know, one thing I've learned, and I'm going to be very interested, I hope I live long enough to see this, there are some people who are just innately not comfortable with screens and innately not comfortable with technology. And I'm waiting for California to realize this. You know, you get a converter for your TV, and it's got 5,000 buttons on it. And who could ever learn to use all the buttons on this converter? It's the same thing with the phone. You get a phone, and it has layers upon layer. You talked about user-friendliness, you know, and I love your metaphor of the real estate on the screen. That's such a great metaphor. Because I think that for many people, I want maximum 10 buttons in my life. I want 10 buttons, and I want to know what those buttons can do. But see, tech people in California and Google and Amazon, you know, wherever, they love buttons. And the more buttons and the more options they can put on, they feel they've achieved their goal. But I think there's going to come a breaking point where they're going to realize, hey, you know what? We're overdoing this. And there's too many buttons, and people aren't buying it anymore. We haven't got there yet. I hope we do. Like Windows 10, I think it was the first Windows 10, or I forget when they got rid of the start button. There, the guy on the camera. Was that, where did they get, you're young and hip. When did they get rid of the, when did they get, who was it that got rid of the start button? Was that Windows 10, the first version? Windows 8, yeah. Say, oh, I'm so, you know, this is where we feel old, right?
I have to correct you. It's in fact Apple got rid of it.
Wait. No, it was Windows. They got rid of the start. Windows 8 got rid of the start button. So Windows 10, they brought the start button back. But something as simple as that, where people said, you know, I need to turn this thing off. How do I turn this off? And so back to your original question, you know, is it all too much? Yeah, it's all too much. And, you know, there's some, you choose your battles, you say, what am I going to stay up to date on and what am I not going to stay up to date on? But one thing in my role as a mentor to young people, I do stay up on video games. And the kids come to me and they'll, you know, so what's new? And they'll tell me about the video game. And I don't play video games. I don't like video games. I'm terrible at them. But I'm interested in them as a social phenomenon. So the kids tell me about the video game. Where do I go? I go straight onto YouTube. And I type in the name of the video game gameplay and I say, oh, okay. Because I can tell a lot about a kid by the game they like to play. First-person shooter games, okay, they're a dime a dozen. That's just, you know, they're a dime a dozen, first-person shooter games. But there's some other games that are strategy games, that are clan games, where you're playing as a group. And when a kid's saying he's playing a clan game, that's very different from a kid who's playing first-person shooter, just run around and shoot everything up. So, and then there's other fantasy games, role-playing games, and so on. There are many genres. So, you know, my advice, we're educated people in this room, you know, and I think, you know, to those whom much is given, much is expected, and I think that we have to educate ourselves about some of this technology, especially where it affects our kids. We can't stay up on everything, but I think we should choose those things which we do stay up on.
Ma'am, you had a question.
2 questions. One is, in terms of technology and the lower socioeconomic segment of our society, how do we think that we'll be able to bridge the gap for that subsection of the population? And the second question is, in terms of quality, do we think that technology will make healthcare quality improve in any way, or what would the outputs be like?
So I do, you've got a good point, is again, it's kind of that access. So what do you do with a person who can't afford the technology? A lot of what is happening in the U.S. is there is a push for, if somebody goes in, it's changing from fee for service. Somebody comes in and they get paid for whatever services was incurred. It's shifting into, no, they come in and you take care of them through the whole thing. If they come back, you're not getting any more money. So it's really a shifting the approach in, how about we provide the scale? How about we provide the cuff, the blood pressure cuff, to be able to do the monitoring at home? What about care management coaches, health coaches, so that we're checking on these folks? Readmissions, there's two primary reasons that people get readmitted back into the hospital after a procedure. And it is follow-up, did they do their follow-up appointment? And two, did they fulfill and take their medications as prescribed? If those two things aren't there, that's where the numbers shoot way up as far as people who get readmitted into the hospital. And so maybe the reason they didn't get their prescription filled and they're not taking it like they're supposed to is they don't have a way to get to the pharmacy. That's why, or maybe they couldn't afford their medication. Okay, if we know we're going to have to pay for them, if the health system's going to have to pay for them, if they're not taking the medication, and then an infection comes along, and they're going to end up readmitted into the hospital, which way's more expensive? And so that's a shift in thinking as, well, now wait a minute, if we're on the hook for this, how do we ensure that people really get that holistic care? And so that is part of what is shifting is health coaches. We have buses that take people to church. Could we not have a bus that would swing through and pick somebody up and take them to their doctor's office? I mean, those are some big shifts. I've got a client in California that they have an asthma. It's an asthma van that it actually visits schools to so those little kids, school-age kids, so they're not ending up in the emergency department. They're asthma mobile. I think they've got a cute name for it, and I can't remember what it is. But those are some big shifts that are happening that, well, now how is that healthcare? It's more that holistic, proactive side. And then I forgot your second question already. Say again?
Quality.
Okay, so with technology, how do we measure quality because of the technology? And you're right. I mean, that is a component. Is, you know, I do work for a technology company, but we do not call our software. We don't call them software. It is not about the technology. We call it a solution, and that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about. Is with my teams, with our whole organization, and throughout all of Cerner, is that it's not just about celebrating, we turned on new software, so what? Let's go one more past that. There's an idea, a belief that there's a business to business. We're a business, we will sell you something. And that's B2B is what they refer to that. And there is a shift, and there's a whole book on that, and I'm not going to be able to end up quoting it, but there's actually a business for business. How about we get paid when you succeed? And there's a shift in some of the thought processes and making sure that that value is truly accomplished. We've got a division in part of our population health group that is actually a value creation office. And that is very much how we work. And so it is making sure that we're following through and making sure that not only did the software get turned on, but how do you know it accomplished value? And so inside a healthcare organization, as you're starting these projects, one of the things that's really important to our group when we're starting these things is we sit down and we make sure that we understand what business problem are you really trying to solve. And that is worth taking that time up front, is making sure that you understand if you're going to make the investment, and these are expensive systems, so if you're going to make that investment in some of these things, is what do you think that's going to do for you? And making sure that you're really clear on that, and then figuring out is it really moving the meter? And so are we really closing gaps in care? That's a big metric in the population health world that we use, is are people truly getting better and being able to see a reduction? I've got a very poor client in Mississippi. It's the Delta Health Alliance, and they have the by March of Dimes, they have the worst premature birth rate in the entire nation, and that is a title that they do not want. And so that is one of their metrics, is they want to reduce the number of premature births. And it's our solutions, but that's part of our measure that we're working with them to see if we move that meter. So it's incorporated, that technology incorporated with processes, and then being able to track and measure those results. You've got to have that full cycle. The software alone won't do it for you. Fair question.
I am conscious that I said I would let you go early, and if I don't let you go, you won't be going early. So may I invite any further questions to come up and speak to, I'm sure Michael and Stephanie will stay around for a few moments to take any more questions, and the coffee break is still running just outside.